Hi, everybody. Yeah, we're starting the program because we have a great opportunity to spend 30 minutes with a rising star in the Congress. And if you have turned on any news channel, you know that big stuff is happening right now, and she has to get back. And so please understand, if you were on your coffee break, that we're getting right down to it. I'm Jane Harmon, the president and CEO of the Wilson Center, and sad that I never served in Congress with Norma Torres. We were just catching up on where her district is and where my district was, both of them in Southern California, and she would have been a great colleague. And I'm delighted to introduce you today, and we have all kinds of plans to work closely together. And we also can leverage the amazing resources of the Wilson Center. So, Congresswoman Torres brings street cred to the issues surrounding Central America. She is the only member of Congress born in the region. Isn't that amazing? Yes. The only member of Congress born in the region. And she came to the U.S. From Guatemala at age 5. Now in her third term in Congress, we totally missed each other, boo. She serves on the influential Appropriations and Rules Committees. And if you know the Congress, those are huge committees. And to get those fairly young in the years is a great credit to her skill. She previously served on the Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security Committees, which are also good committees. But she has exchanged good committees for great committees. And she is the founder and co-chair of the Central America Caucus, which she co-chairs with Congresswoman Ann Wagner, a Republican from Missouri. In 2016, she introduced HRES 145, that's a House resolution, a bipartisan resolution in support of the fight against corruption in Central America, which was unanimously adopted by the House. That's also a big deal as a young member. In 2017, she introduced H.R. 5501, the End Corruption in the Northern Triangle Act, and this April she introduced H.R. 1630, the Guatemala Rule of Law Accountability Act, which has been referred to the House Judiciary Committee. She is our keynote for a brief period of time. She will speak briefly, I will ask her a question, and then you get to ask one or two questions, in a very important program. You've been here all morning, I think, but I just want to thank the Seattle International Foundation, which is our co-sponsor. And I also want to thank, though I miss him dearly, Eric Olson, who was Deputy Director of our Latin America program, headed by the wonderful Cindy Arnson, who's sitting right here, and who now is a consultant here and directs the Central America DC platform. It's kind of a mouthful, Eric, of the Seattle International Foundation. So enough about this, except to say that this issue of Central American governance and migration and the future for some very desperate people are on our minds. It's been a focus here for years, and it makes a huge difference to us and honors us to have you share your insights. So please welcome a rock star in the Congress, and the member from the 35th District in California.
Thank you so much, Jane Harmon, for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate, and I'm very sad that I missed time with you because you have so much to offer members like myself who are interested in just rolling up our sleeves and getting to work. Thank you to all of you for being here today, and a great thanks to the Wilson Center and the Seattle International Foundation for inviting me here. I think that all of us have seen photos, have heard the children, and know what is happening at our border as of today. Children going without soap and toothpaste, families standing in cells for long periods of time without the very, very basics that you and I take for granted. It is such a horrific story that is happening in our country today. What I would always say, the greatest country in the world. Last year, I traveled to the border. I was in Texas and also in my home state of California. So I have seen for myself with my very own eyes what is happening there. But as we in Congress debate funding for an emergency funding bill, I think that everyone here understands that the real problem is not just in our southern border. It is the impoverished villages, the gang-controlled neighborhoods of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. It is also in the halls of power in those countries, in the legislatures, in the courtrooms, in the city halls, and very sadly to say, within police stations. From a 911 dispatcher's perspective, nothing is more alarming to me that when someone needs help, they are not able to get that from their local officials. And I think that everyone here also knows that you cannot address the problems of violence and poverty in the Northern Triangle without looking at the rule of law. The rule of law that commands a civilized community. Unfortunately, while real progress has been made in recent years, that progress is now at risk. There are many people here who can speak to what is happening on the ground. So today I like to focus my remarks on what is happening here in Washington and specifically in the House. Because while the United States doesn't control everything that happens in Central America, we have a lot of influence and a lot of political clout there that we should be utilizing to improve conditions in the region. At times, our support for the rule of law in the region has strengthened the hand of reformers and forced the governments to accept difficult changes. Unfortunately, in the past few years, we have lost some of that focus. In 2015, the Obama administration came to Congress and asked for $1 billion in support of a new comprehensive strategy to address the root causes of migration. With 3 weeks under my belt of being sworn into Congress, I participated in intimate meetings with Vice President Biden and just a few colleagues on an agenda of moving forward and helping people in the Northern Triangle. And at the time, I have to say that I was very proud that we had bipartisan support for the new Alliance for Prosperity. And Congress made a major investment in 3 key pillars: governance, security, and prosperity. And we all came to this agreement with very different perspectives. Some members were more interested in economic development, and some of us were passionate about fighting gangs and drug traffickers. Some of us were focused on the need to strengthen government institutions to make real change possible. But we all agreed that we needed to do more to help people in the region so that they could see a future for themselves, a future that has been stolen from many like me. 4 years later, progress has been very slow. And as you all know, Washington is a place that expects quick flash results. Attention spans are very short, but the kind of change that is needed in Central America is a kind of change that takes decades, if not generations, to see through. I know this firsthand because I was just a young child, 5, when my parents sent me to the United States to protect me from violence and instability. Back then, it was a civil war. We've also seen controversies in the region divide Congress that make it more difficult to maintain consensus. And for many of us, the fraudulent election in Honduras and the Guatemalan government's campaign against CICIG crossed the line and demanded a strong response from Washington. Yet others rushed to the defense of these governments, pushing back on efforts to bring about consequences. Consequences for actions that have caused the influx of migrants at our southern border. In the case of Guatemala, we've even seen hundreds and thousands of dollars spent on DC lobbyists to weaken US support for the fight against corruption. These challenges might have existed no matter who was in the White House. I want to be clear about that. But there is no doubt that this administration has made a difficult situation much worse. Our lack of focus on the region. We are a long way from the consistent and high-level engagement we saw during the Obama administration when Vice President Biden periodically, bi-monthly, flew down to the region, or the leaders of that region came to DC and met and talked about an agenda to move things forward. Instead, this administration has been slow to fill key positions in Latin America and in the Northern Triangle. To take just one example, we still have no ambassador to Honduras. No ambassador, which is still dealing with the fallout of Juan Orlando Hernandez's re-election. And sadly, that's just the start. This administration has cut off development and humanitarian assistance to the region and attempted to take away TPS to 300,000 Salvadorians in Honduras combined. Imagine the instability that would create. And after years of US support for CICIG, this administration has fully supported the Guatemalan government's efforts to put an end to the commission. The commission who was investigating high-level government corruption. So many of us have spent the past 2 years fighting to protect the progress that has already been made and trying to keep things from getting worse. But we urgently need to get back to a positive rule of law agenda. So here are a few ideas about how we can do that. First, while we must be honest about the pace of change, it doesn't happen overnight. It is painful. We must also do a better job of telling the stories that show progress. And many of you in this room can help us do that. To take just one example, CICIG didn't just put powerful people in jail. It also reduced the overall impunity rate from 96% in 2009 to 92% in 2015. That is still far too high, but it's progress. We need to identify more of these stories, and we need to tell them, bring them to light, and celebrate them, not only to encourage members here, but also to encourage progress there. Not as a way of saying that everything is fine and that we don't need to pressure those governments, but to remind our colleagues that improving the rule of law in the Northern Triangle is possible. It is possible, and that these countries are not a lost cause. Secondly, we need to find an effective way to provide rule of law assistance, even when the region's governments are trying to undermine the rule of law. This can include funding for civil society, training for investigative journalists, and supporting them to ensure that they have an open source media that feels protected and supported. In contributions to the International Commission Against Impunity, this year, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I worked hard to make sure that $45 million out of the Central America funds were set aside for these kinds of programs. But maybe most importantly, we still have a lot of work to do to educate members of Congress about the real challenges in the Northern Triangle and what kinds of reforms are truly needed. That's part of the reason that I authored a provision that last year to require a list of corrupt officials from the Northern Triangle. It is critical that members of Congress understand that we are not talking about a few bad apples or a street thug. Congress needs to understand the level of corruption in the Northern Triangle. And as a founder of the Central American Caucus, which I co-chair with Congresswoman Ann Wagner of Missouri, I look forward to working with all of you to make sure Congress recommits itself to a strong rule of law policy in the Northern Triangle. We're at a difficult moment, but the need has never been greater. If we are committed to stopping the cries of children and the issues that we are seeing under this government and what is happening to the kids, that we must commit to ensuring that we work together in a bipartisan way and move forward an agenda that we can all support. So thank you so much, Jane. I'm here to answer any questions.
Well, you want to? Thank you. Excellent. Yeah. So I thought that was excellent and delivered from the heart and informative. That's what we expect at the Wilson Center, and we got it. And talking about bipartisan solutions is something in our sweet spot. Thank you for mentioning that. Let me ask you one two-part question so that we can use whatever time we have for audience questions. And audience questions need to be questions. Identify yourself, no sermons, question. So this is my two-part question. Oh, here comes the intro, though, now that I said no intros. In 2017, after Donald Trump was sworn in, there was an interesting, I thought, conference or summit in Miami, Florida. And I remember it because John Kelly, then the Secretary of Homeland Security, and Mike Pence, the Vice President, and our friend Luis Luis Moreno were the co-sponsors of it. And the point of the conference was to talk about ways to improve governmental capacity in the Northern Triangle, in other words, reduce corruption, and ways to spur business investment in the Northern Triangle. And a couple months later, Mike Pence spoke here about that and about his commitment to that. Well, the actions since don't seem to have supported that effort, and I'm just curious what happened. And secondly, not related, I think we're all curious to understand what is being portrayed on the airwaves this morning as a dispute within the Democratic caucus in the House about a pending appropriations bill. So let me ask you those two things.
Absolutely. Thank you for those questions. What happened in Miami, I don't believe that we can talk about economic empowerment. I don't believe that we can talk about building an infrastructure of commerce when there is so much public corruption. I'm going to try my best to keep from calling out businesses that I have personally spoken to about the issues there. But if you're a business person and you want to expand, ABC supply in Guatemala, and you go out and you get your permits and think that you have paid for all of that. You break ground, and your building is halfway up, and suddenly the local mayor comes around and says, you paid everybody, but you didn't pay me. How do you deal with that? So it's not, it should not be surprising to any of us why we have not been able to accommodate the type of expansion, the type of infrastructure that is needed in the region. Now, at the same time, we should not be cutting those job training programs that we are funding in the region. I get it. Many of those are within, cities to accommodate a larger group of young people that are participating in these programs. But if you think right now the situation is pretty bad in our southern border because many of the migrants are coming from the highlands, what do you think is going to happen when these young people in the cities are impacted, by those cuts in training programs? This is the only thing that is keeping them behind. A promise to be trained, to have a trade, to have a way to make a living. And that, unfortunately, has not been made a priority. So you can't say, I'm going to bring more business without dealing with issues related to the rule of law. We have to deal with issues, around the rule of law and governance, good governance, before we do that. So that's one issue. What is happening in Congress, in the House? It's all of us are very passionate, and we come at this issue when we hear that babies, infants as young as 6 months old, don't have access to the type of food that they need, nutritious food that they don't have, that they are wearing dirty clothes and are don't have access to soap and just the basics. All of us, it is heartbreaking, emotional to think about what is happening to these kids, to see them in cages. But we can't let compromise. We can't give up on compromise. We can't get everything on an emergency funding bill. We have dealt with some of the concerns and assurances that money will not be spent to create and expand these camps, right? We have some of those assurances in this bill for this funding. We have some of those assurances in the 2020 funding bill. We have made some progress in the 2019 bill. But talking to new members of Congress about a combination of the three and how slowly we are moving to make change is very difficult, number one, to explain, and number two, as a new member of Congress, trying to get your head around all of that becomes overwhelming. So that is the challenge where we are. Nobody wants to see an expansion of these centers where children are being held. Nobody wants to see that. We want to see children reunited with their parents. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the children are going to guardians who will protect them.
I appreciate the answer. We used to say we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And you certainly sound convincing as someone who is trying to achieve maximum relief for people, especially kids who are struggling. Eric, who has just sent me a little note that your staff says that you have to leave shortly, and that we can only have one question. So where is the bad staff that said this? Oh, here he is. I asked a two-part question, so Eric, no matter what you say, staff, we're going to have a two-part question, which means two different questions, one from the middle and right here from my dear friend Mark. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Wait.
We have to hear you.
Microphone, identify yourself, stand up.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Rachel Crane. I teach at Lees McRae College, and I'm interested in your views on how CAFTA has affected Central America. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for that question. Trading, when it comes to especially indigenous groups, we've been trading in the region for hundreds of years. How it has impacted Central America, I don't think that it has been an obvious perspective of how things, because we have been so overwhelmed with the kids, with public corruption in the region, and trying to identify solutions for that. How we will move forward with the new CAFTA agreement, I think it's still to be written, and those conversations are still ongoing. So I'm sorry that I don't have a specific how it has.
Okay.
Mark Schneider, currently with CSAS, previously working.
Long time staffer on the Hill, and we worked together closely 400 years ago. Yeah.
My question: the previous speaker from Guatemala had on the board something that said dismantling of the police, and then he had assassination of rural activists. I just add one other thing, which is last year State Department reported 1,400 metric tons of cocaine passing through Guatemala. So has the dismantling of the police in the last year and a half, has that been linked? Do you link that to both of those other occurrences?
I absolutely believe that. We spent a lot of money in the region with our own military, providing equipment and training for the local, the national police, and also for the military. Things seem to be moving in the right direction. But then here comes President Morales and decides these people will no longer serve in my administration. And those folks that we have vetted, right? Good or bad, we had vetted them, we had trained them, and they were on the right track, are no longer there. So it is not surprising to me that the amount of drugs that are going through the port of Escuintla are what it is what it is. And I was just there in the port November of last year. And I tell you that seeing the commitment of some of those soldiers that I engaged with and went on a tour of the port with in Guatemala, they're breaking their backs. They're going out way beyond the limits of the small vessels that they're in. And they're encountering very, very, very dangerous individuals, but they don't have the support that they need to have. And frankly, I am in a place where I can't see the U.S. investing any more money in equipment or training of people that we don't trust. Look at Honduras. How is it that we did not know that the president's immediate family not only had drug labs in Honduras, but also in Colombia? And it is a question that I have asked of both governments, by the way.
Well, on that note, Congresswoman Torres, I said you had street cred. You also have passion and credibility and capability, and we're all going to watch your career with great interest and hope that the news, when you come back on this subject, will have improved. Thank you so much for coming to the Wilson.
Thank you, everyone.